All right, and we are on. Hi, everyone. S here with my good friend Carter Laren from Unsafe Space. Hey, Carter, how you doing?
Howdy. I didn't know you went by S. You should have told
uh,
me beforehand. I almost called you by your name.
you can call me by my name. I go by Katrina as well.
Oh, okay.
That's fine. No last name. Katrina Misanthrope. Yeah, so I have been absent a little while here, guys. Sorry about that. I have been mulling over a lot of stuff, a lot of different things, and I wanted to give them some thought before I started putting it out there for your feedback and consumption. And I've come to the conclusion that I do need to actually put this stuff out here, that I think it needs to be part of the conversation. And our topic today is one of those pieces which I have only just started thinking about. So that's why Carter's here, because basically it was his idea.
Was it? Wait.
More, I'd say so. I think you hit the nail on the head the other day when we were talking about this. So
You're making
for
me sound smarter than I think I am. I don't even remember what did I say that was.
what are we talking about again? Hey, Sergeant. Um, what we're talking about is basically capitalism and the idea of like the relationship between capitalism and morality, right? So,
Oh yeah, now I remember this discussion. Okay.
yes, thank you.
I was brilliant.
And you were totally brilliant in our brief discussion about this. So we wanted to have a longer one and have it publicly where we could hopefully not say anything stupid and maintain this aura of brilliance, at least around Carter, if not around me.
Oh, that's
So
been shattered a long time ago. So don't worry about it.
like, by the way, how like your tie, you're remaining committed to the tie, but it's getting more and more casual every time. Like first it was a suit, then it was like a tie
Yeah.
with like a sweater, and then now it's like loosened. Where are we
Yeah.
going with this?
I don't know. I really hate ties, but they scare the left. So I want to have them in the picture somewhere. Um, I don't
Eventually
know.
you're just gonna like have a tie like tied around your forehead
Yeah,
like a frat
it'll be
boy.
a Rambo bandana eventually.
Yeah. All right, we'll see. We'll have to have you on again and we'll track the progress.
Oh,
Oh,
okay. You can hear echo. I'll
yeah,
switch to
see, I told
headphones. I
you.
didn't
He's gonna
think.
put headphones in.
Yeah, I'll take care of
Thanks,
that while
Sergeant.
Katrina entertains you.
He didn't believe me that the echo would have an impact. So now I sound smart. That's the first time I've ever been right about something technological, I'm pretty sure. All right. So what we started talking about basically was the question of like what is really the relationship between capitalism and morality, because Carter and I both come from an objectivist background, and the very standard objectivist idea is basically like capitalism is the only moral political system. People tend to think of it as an economic system. Really, it's a political system um, that, of course, has economic consequences. And but still, like looking at things from current year here, we're not really seeing that the free market is in and of itself helping much of anything, at least from my perspective. I don't know, Carter, do you disagree?
Um, well, I can say what I said before the other day to you on the phone, which is I think objectivists have this. By the way, I'm gonna pick on objectivists because they're the most ardent and principled defenders of capitalism. And so if I pick on objectivists effectively, everyone else automatically gets tainted. Um, so uh objectivists have this fantasy that a little piece of paper that's written somewhere can override cultural and societal beliefs and norms. And so if you hear them talk, they're like, well, we just need, like, even in Atlas Shrugged, right? Rand's solution was like to have this judge like fix a couple things in the Constitution, and like that would magically fix
It was
society.
literally add property. It's
Yeah,
actually
I
because it
think
was
that's.
that's not even in the Constitution was the really interesting part there.
Oh,
Because
was
I'm
it the
pretty,
Declaration of
yeah,
Independence or
it's in the
something?
Declaration of Independence. It's nowhere
Fair
in the
enough.
Constitution, so it's not even a legally binding document.
Right. But my point is like legally binding, like the Constitution is irrelevant because the Constitution is irrelevant if the culture at large doesn't respect what's written in it. And so, I mean, and this is kind of obvious. Look at what we've been doing for the past couple hundred years. We routinely ignore the Constitution constantly. So having a stronger Constitution or something like written more precisely or accurately, yeah, I mean, maybe that would help for a few years until people decided to change definition of words again to meet their desire, and that will be it, right? And
Right.
so you
There is this
can't.
belief for sure that like it's basically they just need to build a better mousetrap, that there's some inherent flaw in the Constitution because as good as the founders were, you know, they hadn't understood things that Ayn Rand understood because she came post-industrial revolution. And if only they had understood all of that, they could craft a system that
Right,
would be immune to these problems.
right. And
But
I think that's putting the cart before the horse,
yes,
because you can't politics. I mean, what Andrew Breitbart said, politics was downstream of culture, or maybe he said culture was upstream of politics, right? And philosophy is upstream of culture. But the point is, you can't have a political system with all the right rules and laws. And I do agree that capitalism is the only moral system in the philosophic sense. Yes, it is the only moral system. But you can't. That system can't fix a culture. You can't just write the laws of the moral system and then be like, great, now everyone will be moral and it'll work. That system only works if you have a moral culture. And you only have moral culture if you have the right philosophy that it's based on. So I think, I hate to be a pessimist, but all of this trying to like fix politics is it's a lost cause, because it's not going to actually have the effect. If we have the world, just imagine this. If Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is president and all of her friends are in Congress, it doesn't matter what laws you have written anywhere.
right.
And that should be obvious to everyone.
Well, I
So
think
the bad is really philosophical and cultural, is my point there.
right. And I think it's kind of interesting to me that it's not obvious. And I'm a little embarrassed it wasn't obvious to me when I was younger, because I think this is another area where religion, or at least probably all religions, but certainly Christianity, already implicitly understands this, right? Because God, this conception of an all-powerful, all-knowing being, created certain rules, the Ten Commandments, for example, and people disobey them all the time, right?
Right.
So a perfect, omniscient, like omnipresent, whatever being, however you parameterize God, is in the conception of religious people who believe in that, not capable of designing a system that includes humans and free will that solves this problem, right? Like there's no structure, there's no game, like to put it in game theoretical context, there's no game you can design that will prevent cheating, basically, right? Or that will, you can make better and worse systems, of course. Like there are systems that would encourage more corruption or less corruption or different things. I'm not saying that the structure of the game is irrelevant, but a lot of people operating today seem to believe like, okay, we know what the moral game would look like, and if we just keep implementing that game, then suddenly everything's going to be better. And that's never going to happen, because
Yeah.
the rules of the game are nothing without the will to enforce them, even when those rules come literally from God.
I mean, I would say the analogy I kind of like is, if people understand the blockchain, it's like if there's enough nodes corrupt, it doesn't matter what it doesn't matter how perfect your blockchain is. If you reach the threshold of corrupt nodes, the blockchain is corrupt. And the individuals in your society are the nodes of in this metaphor. So it doesn't matter what your algorithms are or anything else. If you got enough corrupt nodes, it doesn't work.
Right.
And that's where we are.
Right. And then the question is like, what do we mean by corruption on the individual level? And the place where this really stuck out to me the most was in this constant like banging, like headbutting that's going on between factions on the right, where basically the private company meme, right? Where a conservative gets banned from Facebook or gets banned from Twitter, and the perpetual response from a certain segment of the right is, well, build your own platforms. Oh, those platforms won't give you web hosting, build your own web host. Oh, they won't give you payment processing, build your own payment processor, right? Oh, they won't let you, whatever. Like just the constantly, well, it's a private company, therefore they can do whatever they want. And what occurred to me was, no, they can't. Now, in a moral system, technically, like there's two components to it, right? There's what's legal and then there's what's moral. And everything that's illegal should be stuff that's immoral. But the other way around is not true. There are plenty of immoral things that you should be allowed to do, like cheat on your spouse, like lie when it's not fraud, right? Different things like that. And but that doesn't mean that that area that's not covered by the law is just a free-for-all, right? And each individual just decides whether or not they want to do that, and then face the consequences when reality catches up to them or something like that. No, it's supposed to be socially policed, right? So capitalism has this enormous burden on us, which is that we have to be able to operate in the system not just based on price mechanisms, not just based on, I like this product, or this product is cheaper, or this serves my material needs. You need to incorporate these spiritual concerns. Like you need to look at this and say, Jeff Bezos is a piece of shit. And I don't support what he supports. He takes a ton of his money and he puts it toward causes that I think are wrong. Right. He, aside from them being mixed up with the government, even if we set aside, pretend he wasn't mixed up with the government, I don't agree with how he treats workers. I don't agree with how he is competing, courting people onto his platform and then undercutting them and becoming a wholesaler and all these other different things, like many, many levels, right, on which Amazon has done things that I don't think are ethical business practices and I don't think are good for the country. I then have the responsibility as an individual within the capitalist system to basically do something about that. But no one's going to do that,
well,
including the objectivists who... and said, are you blind to all of this stuff and just worship it? Because they're like, look how efficient it is. Look how low the price is. Look how fast I can get like a fucking pair of socks, like shipped to my door. And then someone takes a picture of your door to show that the socks got there. And no one thinks this is weird and creepy, instead of like, no, it's just the greatest thing ever. Now I can live my totally atomized existence, like hiding in my house, never going anywhere, never interacting with anyone.
Hiding in your house, never going anywhere. No, I think you're right, but this is kind of back to the original point, which is that if you don't have a culture of moral people, if you don't have a moral culture, then the people that rise to the top in a capitalist system, this isn't a capitalist system, so we should talk about that in a minute, but people that rise to the top and end up being the owners of Amazon and billion-dollar companies, they aren't necessarily moral people, because all along the way, people didn't give a crap whether they were moral about what they did. They were very, very pragmatic, and so they rose all the way to the top. I just watched last night to celebrate Female History Month. We watched the Theranos documentary, and
I didn't know there was a documentary. I need to watch it. What's it called?
Out for Blood, I think.
Okay. Yeah. The same title as the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And Elizabeth Holmes, the thing that we both, so my wife and I are both like enmeshed in Silicon Valley. We've been here for 20 years and like know Silicon Valley culture very well. And we both came away from it going, yeah, she did horrible things, but she's not really any different than most of the founders that we know. Like most of them, they just like the ones that we know that succeed, it like worked out before they got caught. Like that's what happened. Like it worked out before they got caught. That's all. And because she's in the biomedical industry, like her mistakes were more grave, right? If it doesn't work out with your iPhone, that's not as important as not working out with your blood test. But it's a culture of pragmatism here. And everywhere. And I think, we can get into philosophically why that is. I would argue it's the result of the kind of destruction of religion and then the nihilism that's been pervasive in culture for decades. But that's where we are, right? And so it's
Yeah. So all you're
pragmatists
going to
who
get
rise to
is
the top, and
the
objectivists
people
don't
who are best in that
distinguish.
system, right?
Yeah,
Which is, of course, deeply ironic because one of the main conflicts in Atlas Shrugged that runs throughout the entire book is between the pragmatists and, I guess, what would you say, the idealists?
it's between the
But
moral guy, right? It's between Reardon and Orrin Boyle, and Orrin Boyle is way more representative of most business people in the U.S. than is Hank Reardon,
right, so
hands down.
that's the other thing that's interesting, and that's maybe this kind of comes back to the perpetual point about the ivory tower sort of problem, right? It's like how many objectivists actually work in business? Because like
Right? Yeah,
the
not many.
most of the ones who do ultimately end up getting attacked for like violating some like rule on the philosophical side, uh, you know, and there, I mean, it's gotten to the
Well,
point.
they can't run public companies, right? You have to stay private. If you have morals, if you're like an objectivist leaning even, and you're running a company, you got to stay private because it's the only way you can kind of maintain control and isolate yourself in some respect from getting fired from your board by
Yeah,
the
I mean, that's
board or
what's
whatever.
interesting
Like,
because you saw it a lot with Trump, right? Like, so objectivists can be against business people. They're almost universally against Trump. I will frequently hear from them that in certain industries, like the construction industry, it's probably impossible to be a moral person and operate in that industry because of like what you have to do. So they understand on some level the pragmatism, but still when it comes down to policy questions or they have a special blind spot for tech as well, I think, and for Silicon Valley because of just that nice word entrepreneur, as though entrepreneurs are like a special moral class of people who are like more moral than other people instead of just people who are more risk loving, more driven, and then otherwise the same as like everybody
right?
else with the same
Yeah.
problems and the same pragmatism. But then when it comes, like I said, when they roll that up into policy considerations, it's as though, like there's a handful of Orrin Boyles and then there's a handful of Hank Reardons. And then most people in between are like, I don't know, an Eddie Willers or something like that. Like, or I don't know, maybe it's even worse than that. Maybe it's even this fantasy that like most of them are Hank Reardons and it's just a handful of Orrin Boyles, like ruining it for everyone.
Yeah,
And that's not the situation at all.
yeah, I think that's what I think. They think that most people are in most business leaders are kind of this intrinsic Reardon who've made some compromises reluctantly, even though because they don't maybe quite get it, but really their essence is Hank Reardon.
Right.
And I'm not sure that's true. I think their essence is neither Hank Reardon nor Orrin Boyle. If I were to name the essence, especially in Silicon Valley, it would be Bernie Madoff. Like,
yeah.
right? That's the essence. It's this fake it till you make it. Hope you get acquired first, which will make you or that you last long enough to go IPO and the public doesn't figure out for it. Like a lot of these companies aren't actually building long-term profitability. Like we haven't seen that in many. Some of them have, but a lot of them haven't. And it's not as healthy as it could be. It's certainly not about fundamentals. But I think we need. Someone in your chat said they think that things went wrong when capitalism became the goal instead of a tool to serve the people. I think so. Katrina, I want to hear about. I don't know that we should be using the word capitalism anymore because I don't think anyone understands what it means. I don't think Frank Underwood here. Sorry, Frank. I don't think you understand what capitalism means either. Capitalism is simply individual rights codified. It's just private property and it's basically the non-aggression principle kind of codified and enforced by the state, which is a contradiction as an anarcho-capitalist, I will admit. But like, that's all capitalism is fundamentally. And we don't live in a capitalist society. And the objectivist will say like, oh, well, actually, wait, let's talk about pragmatism for a minute. Because if you're the CEO of a publicly traded company, I had this conversation, I don't know if it was with you, Katrina, but with someone the other day. If you're the CEO of a publicly traded company, you can't ask those people to not use the power of the state against their enemies. I mean, you can ask them, but they can't do it. They can't not do it. And it's not even because they're evil. It's because they'll get fired.
Yeah.
They'll get fired. Like once you're the CEO of a publicly traded company, And even before that, you have fiduciary responsibility. You have a board to report to. You've got investors, and your job is to increase shareholder value. And if you've got options available to you that are immoral but legal, you are obligated to exercise those options. And if you refuse to, then they will replace you. And in extreme cases, they could try and accuse you of breaching fiduciary duty and going to jail, like you just said, Katrina. Which is why, if you're going to build a company, you basically need to keep control. If you wanna not have to do immoral things, or you'll lose control because they'll fire you. You have to lobby. You have to lobby because your competitors are lobbying. So you've got to do it.
Yeah. I mean, this is what's interesting to me because we are perfectly aware that okay, like for instance, I think like every country, I'm like 99.9% sure I'm correct about this, that like in every country, murder is illegal, right? But like murder, I think that's
I
correct.
don't know. In some Islamic countries, though, I think you're allowed to murder under certain circumstances.
Under
right?
certain like things that we would consider murder, but like in general, everyone's like randomly walk up to someone on the street and bash their head in with a rock is like a no in every culture, and yet it happens in every culture, right? And we know that like election fraud and different things like that are illegal, but they also happen in every culture. Hang on a second. Sorry. We got interrupted. We got interrupted. We didn't sleep very long. All right. No, I can keep going probably just with the camera off. Right. So corruption, though, by definition, exists in contradiction to the rules of the system, right? So that right there is proof that the rules aren't going to enforce anything. We also know that corruption levels vary from culture to culture, right? So we know that there is some element of like the culture's effect on how that kind of thing plays out, right?
Yeah.
So if we know all of that, then why on earth would we think that when we already have a mixed situation, like mixed economy situation, like we have in the United States, that anything would be fixed by introducing more quote unquote capitalist components to that system, right? Because anything, like you were saying, it kind of like you would need everyone basically to agree to not lobby the government for stuff in order for a CEO of a public company to be able to behave morally, right? But that's always what happens. Like we agree to a certain degree to follow the rules. We all agree that certain things are off limits and certain things are okay.
Right.
And okay. She wants to also hit the computer. You want to play with the computer? Oh no. Oh no. But that's the morality and the culture piece that you were talking about, right? So if we aren't already agreed, someone's going to do, like, if we aren't all agreed on what's off limits, someone's going to do it, even if those things are against the rules, right? Which you'll see even if we pass laws against it, like we see in plenty of countries where like corruption is just a way of doing business. And you would say the same thing about breaking the law. Here we tend to be more law-abiding, so I think that maybe blinds us a little bit more to the idea that the law can solve these problems for us on both sides. This isn't just the objectivists pushing more capitalism. This is also the people who want more protectionism and more restrictions. Sorry, guys. Well, I think a mess.
No, I think you're right. I think partly because the United States, though, was founded on a much more moral. Now, granted, I get there's slavery and issues, right? But in the context of other countries at the time and historically, it was a much more moral foundation. It recognized individual rights. I think it granted moral authority to the government that you don't see in a lot of other countries. Like, no one thinks you're a bad person in Italy if you don't pay your taxes. They're like, yeah, why would you pay the king? I mean, it's not the king anymore, but like, it's that kind of a mindset, right? The classism, actually, which is more prevalent in Europe, also breeds this kind of disrespect for the rules, which is healthy, in some
Yeah,
ways,
it's
right?
interesting. It is interesting because like I keep thinking about, I'm like, oh, could we make a better system that's more robust or more resilient or these different things? And one thing I've been thinking about doing possibly is like making a video on a retrospective of the French versus the American Revolution, like sort of a revisitation of Edmund Burke, because at this point, I think maybe the French Revolution was more effective. I mean, for one thing, you will see like during the French Revolution. So this would be my case about Americans being law abiding. I very much hope that your theory is correct, that it has something to do with more moral authority in the government. I think it probably has a lot more to do with capital punishment for felonies in the history of the Anglo-Saxon people. And that the
Oh, you mean
people,
like it's like a cultural thing where like the
and a
Anglo-Saxon
genetic
people
thing,
are
that all like anyone who committed theft, rape, or murder was put to death and therefore
Oh, I
didn't
see.
have any more children. And
Okay,
we
so
ended up with an
we have a lower
exceptionally
instance anyway.
right. So we ended up being an exceptionally law-abiding people, and now that's coming around to bite us in the butt. Right now that our
Mm.
laws are immoral. Now you look at something like France, and like we make fun of France all the time for being cheese-eating surrender monkeys, but look at these yellow vest protests. I cannot. I absolutely cannot imagine Americans having that kind of endurance for protest.
Yeah,
I
that's a good point.
like BLM didn't manage it. Like our ones that are super well financed don't manage it. We have all this blah 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 from the gun owners, right? About like rah Malone LeBay and like blah blah blah. Like you can't take our guns, and how are you gonna take our guns? We got how are they gonna take guns? Milo Yiannopoulos pointed this out ages ago, right? They pass a law saying we're taking your guns, and then you hand them over.
Right.
Italians, guns are straight up banned, and there are tons of guns in homes in Italy. Because when they pass a law banning them, people don't turn them in.
Right.
They just keep them.
Right.
Right. And it's
Right.
like, okay, yes, that means maybe the trains don't run on time in Italy. There are a lot of downsides to that. Italy's not exactly a booming economy, and their planes got shot down by spears in Ethiopia. Okay. I get it. There's like, but on the other hand, I think Italy is still going to be here in another 200 years. And I don't know that America is.
Yeah, maybe.
There's the black pill.
I'm not sure if Italy will be either. But yeah, no, I mean, and actually what I was thinking when you were saying that, I couldn't help but thinking of China, because I view China
Yep.
as very very rule following in some ways. But I don't know where they fit, because in other ways they're not rule following at all. And so I haven't thought about it too much where Chinese culture fits there. There definitely was harsh punishment for
Non-conformity more than
nonconformity.
breaking rules. Yeah.
Yeah, but they also seem to be kind of okay. They seem to be pragmatists about like double parking and breaking little laws
Right.
like that. Like they
And
don't care.
right. And that's very different from the like Northern European cultures, right? Like
Very.
that
Yeah.
for us, it's like America is less like this than some of the countries, but this is also why socialism works reasonably well in some countries like Sweden and Switzerland and whatnot, right? Because people aren't cheating that system. Not on a I'm sure there is some cheating, but they're not cheating on a
Right.
significant scale, right? Because if you make a rule that you can't park in this parking spot, they won't do it. Right. I feel Americans are a little bit in between. Like there's a good streak in Americans who will just be like, this is kind of stupid. I don't think I'm going to follow this rule. But it's always on the fringes where it doesn't really matter. And when you get to the
Right.
stuff where it does matter, it seems to be we don't know how to draw that line.
Yeah. Well, we've also gotten pretty soft, right? I mean,
we're really soft. I'm sorry. I'm really mad now. I'm like, this is bleeding into the other topic I was telling you that, my new dead horse that I'm beating is hedonism, right? And I keep seeing so many examples of it. I just saw the other day I went to an NRA event. It was like a Friends of NRA auction banquet. They had a color guard come out, right? And every single member of the color guard was grossly overweight, like obese, overweight, right? And it's like, I'm just like, what? I'm looking around this room and I'm just like, what is this? Like, these are the people who think that they're like the salt of the earth Americans, that they're like, have the pioneer spirit being kept alive. And, it's not going to be alive for too much longer by the looks of it. It's like half a half
So
a
you're saying that the
donut
pioneer
away
spirit is
from a heart
diabetic? Is that
attack.
what you're
Right. Yes. The American spirit is diabetic at this point. Absolutely. Yeah. The American spirit can neither see nor feel its toes and has absolutely no idea, like, and doesn't have the slightest conception of how, like, it has this absolute delusion. Like, this is boomerhood to the max, right? This total delusion that, like, they can snap out of it whenever they want to. You know, that like when the chips are down, they'll like flip a switch and we'll become a lean, mean fighting machine, and you know, we'll overthrow the tyrants and blah blah blah, whatever. And I see no evidence of that. I
Yeah.
mean, not nowhere, like here and there, obviously, but like overwhelmingly, that's not what I see. It's very different from what I see when I look at, you know, the protesters in Europe. I mean, and I roll my eyes at European stuff as much as anyone. I could not live in Europe. You know, it would drive me nuts. But I don't know. They're not eating themselves into an early grave, you know, and they could. They have access to the same foods for the most part as we do. I mean, they ban GMOs and stuff, but like, I don't think
GMOs aren't what cause.
that's
They're
the
not what's
reason.
causing diabetes.
Yeah.
They have Twinkies there,
Right. Yeah.
and cheap soda. So,
Right.
yeah. I don't know. So, what's the black pill that you felt like you were black pilling people today? Because this conversation to me is like, yeah, this is all pretty obvious. So either I'm black pilled more than I thought, or we're missing something.
I mean,
I don't mean obvious, by the way. I just mean like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the black pill part is like, well, then what is the path forward, right? Because it's one thing, it's kind of easy and comfortable to strategize politically. It's like, oh, we need to pass this law, we need to elect this person, we need to build the wall, we need to do blah, 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 whatever. We're not, but we're recognizing that that's not what needs to happen, right? We need to do the very difficult work of rebuilding the moral character of an entire nation, if that's even possible. I have no idea how you do that. You obviously don't do it by writing a book.
Yeah,
that's been tried.
I agree with you. And actually, that's a question I've been thinking about as well, which is, in fact, I was just brainstorming. I have a whiteboard right over there, and I'm just brainstorming today about it. Like, what's the? I mean, I have written down, how does philosophy relate to culture? Like, how do those two relate, and how do you then influence culture? And build healthy philosophy into a culture. And obviously, even if we knew how to do it, which I think would be fun to try and figure out, but I don't know how to do it. And even if we did know how to do it, it takes a long time.
Yes.
It takes a really long time. And so then the kind of practical question comes along. I always think of the concept of kind of, I'll say freedom, but I really mean like the concept of individual rights and the individual as sovereign over the state, right? That concept, I think of it as like this torch, right? And America kind of like lit the torch and it's dying. And I really want it to continue in America, but it's more important that it continues regardless of where and how. And so the question then is like, okay, well, do we have to like go create a little safe environment for this torch to like survive the apocalypse so that it can like be reborn somehow? Like, how do we do that? Right. I think that's what the libertarian free staters had in mind back when they were trying to do like the Free State Project. But it's not, that obviously didn't work. And I don't know, because we certainly don't, even if we knew how to affect culture, we don't have time.
Right.
There's no way we have time. So the question is now like, okay, well, what are the stopgap things we do to kind of survive so that someone like our kids can, there's still a little bit of light left in that torch and they can build something, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know I don't know the answer to that.
I do think that, that the possibility of like rekindling the torch somewhere else, that's definitely something where books can be a part of it. Not like political book of the year, right, 2019, but works like real philosophical works, right? Like
preserving the Enlightenment,
like
right? Preserving the Enlightenment and the products of the Enlightenment are what's necessary. But I mean,
preserving that
Right.
content, because that happened before, right? I mean, we previously had like a general decline. I don't know. I feel like I get so many so much propaganda through my history education that I'm not 100% sure about this anymore. But my understanding is there was a bit of a falling off of the Greco-Roman sort of philosophy and traditions for a while in the West. And then that was brought back, right? And that didn't come back because all of a sudden a bunch of Greeks and Romans like showed up and we're like, hey, remember us? You know, it was like, no, it was because, you know, people who had nothing to do with those, not nothing, but, you know, people who didn't have anything directly to do with those people started consuming their works again and implementing the ideas. So that is something you can do in terms of planting a seed. But for me as a mother, you know, that's not super comforting. I mean, I don't get me wrong, like I care about it to some degree, but not nearly as much as it's like, you know, my daughter's life, my grandkids' life, you know, even like my lineage overall. And that's where it gets like really scary, right? And I don't know, it's hard to know where to look for inspiration. I mean, I do think the Reconquista in Spain is pretty inspiring, and it's pretty interesting the way that a culture can seem dead for 500 years and then all of a sudden come back, you know, overthrow their foreign rulers and you know, get back to, I don't know, eating ceviche or whatever it is that they do.
Right.
But, you know, that's very much more in that, that does, I don't know if like America has that same kind of thing, if that makes sense. Like it just, I don't know. I don't know if like, because that is like a people, that's like a culture in a very anthropological sense, you know, rather than an idea. Like that's like the idea maybe of self-rule, self-determination for that group of people is like the idea in there. That's not the same as trying to preserve an idea like freedom or capitalism or something like that. And, you know, I don't know if we actually said the word. So the thing that you said to me that I thought was so smart was capitalism being an emergent property of a moral culture, right? And if I think about it like that, then it almost seems pointless, not just pointless, but actually destructive to push these ideas, right? Like I am quite convinced at this point that the idea of bringing quote unquote freedom to different places is definitely destructive, right? Like we've seen that enough.
What different places do you mean?
Like the foreign wars that we've had in the Middle East, for instance. Those are the most famous, most recent ones. But I think just about any time, I'm not sure, like even if it happens to work out, I'm not sure that it's moral to come in as an outsider and basically tell a bunch of people, like basically use force to come in, like what we're trying to do in Venezuela, right? Like put a guy into power who's never run for president.
Yeah.
I mean, of course. So it just does, but like, so you can't just like apply it, right? I mean, yeah, you could kind of tell people about it. You could see if it catches on in the culture, but you know, it's that like, it feels like it's that same old kind of white savior complex that we just are like, we know this better way of doing it and it'll work anywhere equally well, like for any people, regardless of their norms, regardless of their situation, regardless of anything. Like it's just the perfect, you know, way to be. And we're going to go like export that, whether it's with force or it's just with extremely aggressive economic expansion. I don't know if it makes too much of a difference in the end. You know, it's just at the end of the day, empires are immoral. And you know, if you want to, I don't know that you'd even need, therefore, to preserve an idea like freedom, because if at some point another culture has the correct parameters to support freedom, then, you know, it will spontaneously emerge.
Yeah, I guess. I guess so. Maybe. I mean, I completely agree that you can't just go in with guns, which is what we do. We go in with guns, shoot some people, and say, here, this is the political system that works. And we don't even, I mean, it's not even like we implement actual freedom or capitalism, right? We implement democracy most of the time, which is, you know, capitalism's enemy. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And I do think of capitalism as an emergent property of a moral culture. But again, we're back to the question of like, okay, so then like, how do you change culture? Or how do you preserve a culture?
Right.
Right. I
Either
mean,
one
yeah,
would be good
I
to
guess,
know.
right. So I could think like, okay, fine. Maybe you're right. Maybe, I've got a hard drive sitting here and I'll just put all the best works of Western civilization on the hard drive, and someone in 500 years will figure out how to read it, and, they'll restart civilization. Fine.
Yeah.
Um, okay. As long as the Library of Alexandria isn't burned, we have access to, or whatever, right? Like, keep the stuff, fine. But then the question becomes like, okay, well, how do we kind of preserve? Because it's not completely gone, Katrina. There are a lot of people who, I wouldn't say maybe 100% agree with us. There's probably not a lot of people who 100% agree with everything we're talking about. But there's a hell of a lot of people in the West who kind of are of the general feeling of like, hey, government, leave me the hell alone. I just want to like go do my thing, and I want to be left alone, and I want to be in a society where the government mostly leaves me alone. Like, there's a lot of people like that. Not as many as there used to be, but I've been circling back to this idea of like co-locating at some point with these people, but again, I feel like the libertarians failed with the Free State Project there, and I don't want to restart something that was a clear failure. But on the other hand, you fled California. I've got a lot of friends who are fleeing California. We plan to flee California. Then the question becomes like, where to go? Are there places where, we can get a critical mass of people? And even if it's just one spot, at least we've built a community where we leave each other alone and support each other in kind of the traditional communal sense rather than in the communist sense.
Well, I mean, in practical terms, I've basically implemented the co-locating thing myself, right? And I think that I wouldn't necessarily dismiss it, actually, as much as I, hate to say do something that libertarians did or tried to do. But we know, especially as objectivists, that libertarianism and morality are not exactly like, they don't really go hand in hand, right? So no wonder that it
failed. Because libertarian is political, not philosophical, right? Yeah.
Right. So no wonder it failed, because why would you uproot your life and move to Vermont or whatever if you hold those kind of values, right? Like, if your value is just like, oh, like, I like capitalism, I like material comfort, I like consumerism, which is what the values tend to be of libertarians. It's like, well, you're just going to stay wherever your job is. You're not going to go to Vermont and work in a gas station just for the sake of trying to control the government there, or New Hampshire, whatever it was. People don't give, I don't forget what the exact phrase was, but it's hard to get people to part with any amount of comfort resources for things that they claim that they value that are abstract, right? Like, we have a very materialistic consumer driven culture right now. If you try to get someone to give like $200, for something that they claim is deeply important to them, like, good luck. I can't remember the last time I gave that much. I guess I can, but like, I don't do that every day. I don't do it even maybe more than once a year. And I have, plenty of comfort around me, but it's so easy always to say like, oh, I need it because I need a bigger house. I need it because I need to send my kids to private school. I need it because I need blah, 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 blah. And like, some of those reasons are valid, but a lot of them just come down to like, you're not willing to be uncomfortable for this bigger value. But as things accelerate, people will become more and more comfortable with that because they don't have a choice. And I think the co-locating will happen because people will be actually just driven out of places. The people who are smart, the people who are forward-looking, are going to see, kind of the rifts, like see the balkanization that's coming, and you're going to end up with this result, even if it wasn't planned in the way that the libertarians tried to plan it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. You're right. One, it will become less comfortable for people anyway, so it'll be easier to do. I'm as you're speaking though, I was thinking maybe one of the things that's necessary is, for the libertarian Free State Project thing, they were trying to unite around politics, and maybe you need to just have a little more constraint and a little clearer vision, so that the people that do come are contribute greatly to being there, and you really get, you don't just get there's inspiration for being there, and there's a lot of value for every added person. So maybe you you make a very clear philosophical and moral argument for what you're trying to build and what kind of person should come. And maybe you get fewer people at first, but the kind of people that you get are higher quality. I don't know.
I mean, this is something that you know from business, right? And that we have become and this is part of us becoming soft that we're very uncomfortable with. But part of the reason why America survived immigration as long as it did was because it was very difficult here and most people went back, right? Like 70% of immigrants from the 19th century went back. And that was when it was not easy to go back, right? It was expensive and you might die on the journey and people still went back, right? That happened because we made it difficult. A company that is actually moral, or at least I shouldn't say that it's necessarily moral, but a company that actually represents values, like unique values, instead of becoming something generic, like basically every corporation today that has a mission statement that you could just swap out the name of the company and it would look like you wouldn't even notice, right? That it was a different company's mission statement now. The companies that have a real identity and a real set of values have a lot go through a lot of employees. Like new employees, they don't have high turnover for people who stick around. But when someone joins the company, you very quickly figure out whether or not you fit there, and you have no problem getting rid of the people who don't fit. And that's something like we have totally lost. Like we are so unwilling to filter through people. I don't know whether we put this on the public schools or like just a combination of everything. Like the progressive ideas or the notion of equality that has gotten totally out of hand. But basically we have absolutely no ability to see discrimination as a good thing anymore. And that is like literally killing us. Right. And that is making it so difficult for people to build what you're talking about building as well.
Yeah, it's weird because I've been in the startup world for 20 years, and I remember it wasn't that long ago that when I was advising startups or even building startups, and people were advising me, it was pretty normal to have a discussion about the first few hires are critical in terms of culture. They've got to be a perfect culture fit. You got to be discriminating even if someone comes along with the skill set that you need. If they're not a great cultural match, you got to ditch them. And that was required to kind of build this core foundation upon which the rest of the company was going to be built. And that was understood. I think in recent years, that's been replaced by this. You have to make sure you have diversity early on, and you have to have an intersectional culture, basically. So instead of founders being taught to like find the cultural fits, they're actually taught to find non-cultural fits, right? They're like find people who are different. And granted, the difference that most people that are doing this are looking for is surface level. It's like skin color and gender, which is basically irrelevant. But often that comes with major cultural differences as well. And so they strive to create a rainbow as a foundation instead of a clear united culture. And I don't think that works very well. I think they suffer as a result of it. But that's kind of the current that's the advice that people are getting.
I mean, I can tell you on the ground for people who are, the cogs in the machine of Silicon Valley, that the term culture fit is seen as a very dirty word. It's seen as an excuse to basically be racist now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's used. Yeah, it is used as an
and like
now.
Yeah, we can't even use it as, or I shouldn't say we because I'm not in Silicon Valley, but it's not even really safe to use it as a reason for rejecting a candidate. If you want to give feedback, it's like that's a call to the EEOC right there.
It used to be a valid reason, and now you'll get sued if you say culture fit, especially if the person you're saying culture fit to is if that candidate meets some social justice criteria, like some intersectionality criteria. I mean, I think I've mentioned this at on our show on Unsafe Space before, but I was I was called a Nazi because I didn't invest in a black woman's business who the business itself was actually illegal. She came and pitched. She came and pitched to us. The only reason we actually even had a meeting with her was we have a guy who did the first level screening. This was at a venture fund. The guy who did the first level screening, and I remember asking him, "Should we meet with this person?" And he was like, "No, they're not great. The business kind of sucks, but it's a black woman, and you really need to get your diversity numbers up, so you should meet with her anyway, just in case." And so you were like, "Okay, fine." So we met with her, and she proposed a business that was illegal, both at the federal and state level. Seemed to not care that it was illegal, and it was also just a dumb business, even if it had been legal. When we declined to invest, she went around and told the community that we were Nazis, and that we didn't invest in her because she was a black woman. And that kind of stuff. I'm not the only one that's happened to. That happens a lot.
Right.
Lately. Only lately. It didn't used to happen, but it happens a lot now. In fact, I have stopped advising. This is going to make me sound like a misogynist. I've stopped advising female founders completely. I have a couple that I used to advise that I'm like continuing with, but I'm not like I advise founders, but I won't advise females because I don't want to be in the same room alone with a female. I sound like Mike Pence now.
Yeah, I was going to say the Mike Pence rule is
I'm afraid of being accused of something, right? And without proof that I didn't do something, it would be catastrophic. So I just avoid the meetings, which I know is horrible for female founders. Sorry, but this is the culture that has been set up. I need to protect myself. And to do that, I just need to make sure that I can't get accused of anything because I wasn't there.
Well, personally, I don't see nearly enough women pushing back against that stuff. So I don't feel too sorry for them. I mean, this is where, again,
right.
I see the objectivist, right? Like the objectivist perspective with like the businessman, right? Like you're talking about the people from the generation you were talking about who started companies with this idea of culture fit being very strong at the beginning. Those people now have big companies like Google and like Twitter and whatever. And now that they have these big companies and they're running them as big companies, they are spouting this new bullshit about culture fit is racist and blah, 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 right? Now that they benefited from it. And I feel like the objectivist story is like, oh, like these poor businessmen just don't even know how great they are. And like, they're just swallowing the morality that's being handed to them by college professors or by the media who are the real villains, right? Or whatever. And it's like, okay, sure. Yeah, that is probably where they're getting it from. But so what? So what? They're still pieces of shit.
It doesn't excuse them.
I don't care. Yeah. I don't care. And I don't care that like, I don't care that you're, the female entrepreneur who legitimately has a good idea, who, quote unquote, innocently accepted feminist ideas while she was in college, now can't get a mentor. I don't care. Sorry.
Right.
Like, sorry, not sorry. That's what we're told to say as women, right? I've been told not to say sorry. So sorry, not sorry. Women who now don't get mentors. I'm sorry. Well, look, you need to stand up more.
I'm the anomaly. There's plenty of white knight virtue signaling going on in Silicon Valley. I mean, we're still on the stage right now. I mean, my wife and I were just talking about this because she's in venture capital, and she's like, "This is crazy." Like, she recognizes that like all she has to do is like be a woman, and she gets meetings, like, and she gets like speaking opportunities that she wouldn't normally get, right? And she knows it, and she says often during the speaking opportunities that like, hey, this doesn't make sense. And then they don't invite her back. But, that's the way it is. We're in a culture right now where everyone is scrambling to virtue signal and show how inclusive they are by looking for the most marginalized intersectional people to prop up.
Right. And that is where the incentives get pretty perverse. And I am slightly sympathetic because obviously it's hard not to take advantage of that situation. I'm not even going to say it's wrong not like to take advantage of it.
Right.
You know, get the meetings if you can, sure.
Well,
But you know,
also, how would you know? Sometimes you just don't know why you're getting
yeah,
like,
you don't know, or you don't know until after you've already taken it or something like
right.
that. So fine, that happens. And then, you know, some people though then don't end up recognizing that's what happens, and they legitimately think that they're, you know, a special snowflake who's super
Right.
amazing. And that, you know, for all we know, that's what happened with Elizabeth Holmes. You know, who knows?
Honestly, I think that was part of it. I'm not 100% sure, but if you look at her board, um, and granted, I'm just coming off watching the documentary, but the of the people, so she approached like a lot of Stanford professors, but also like a lot of powerful people to advise her. And the only one that seems to like right away be like, yeah, I don't think she knows what she's talking about, and I don't want to work with her, was a female medical professor at Stanford who sent her to
Mm,
someone else who was a guy, and the guy quit his job at Stanford to go work for her. And her entire board was like Henry Kissinger was on the board, like
yeah.
big name, like basically old white guys who were all kind of enamored with her because she
Yep.
was young and played the part of brilliance.
Which proves the
Um,
same thing again, right? Because like again, it's the old white guys who got to play by different rules when they were younger, you know,
right.
now forcing everyone else that made them successful, and then now forcing people to play by rules that are destructive just to assuage their own, you know, egos and sense of morality. I mean, it's quite gross. But you will end up finding, you know, you can play the game for a while, but you will end up finding, if you are a female who stands up against this stuff in Silicon Valley, you will eventually get blacklisted. You'll get blacklisted because of other females
Yeah,
in Silicon
that's not
Valley.
surprising. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it play out. You know, there's some high profile instances of it, but
Right.
you know, you as always, you have to be the right kind of diversity, right? So you might be able to get a couple jobs, but if you actually start speaking out against, you know, hiring people only because of their genitals, you know, you'll
Or
get
no, their
James Demord.
identification, but it's not
Yeah,
genitals anymore.
that's right, or their
Um,
identification.
yeah.
You'll
No,
get Demord.
there's this I think there's still this underlying assumption that Silicon Valley is a meritocracy, because partly that's true. There's some still meritocracy in it, of course. I'm not trying to say that there's no meritocracy, but it used to be very strict meritocracy, with the exception that it's always been about who you know, and like that's always part, like networking in any industry is part of a thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that aside, there was a big meritocratic element of Silicon Valley, and that's dying, and I think don't people on the outside don't realize that that's dying. And so,
Right.
when you got a bunch of powerful people saying invest in Elizabeth Holmes, she's brilliant, she's the next Thomas Edison or Steve Jobs or whatever, uh people assume that it's based on her merits that she got there. But in reality, she didn't seem to be very knowledgeable about medicine at all. She was
No.
just a
Yeah.
really good bullshitter.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it, you know, is just gonna keep getting worse and worse on this point because the underlying morality is just too corrupt. Because I don't think that, like, meritocracy is complicated, and this is partly coming from me like getting older. But you know, when I was younger and getting into objectivism, I was very excited by this idea of like, I'm gonna work like 80 hours a week, and I'm gonna, like, you know, do like rise to the top and like fight my way and do all this stuff, and it sounded amazing. And I thought, like, you know, Dagny passed out at her desk was like the most romantic thing in the world, and that's like, you know, my hashtag goals. And then, you know, I get older,
By the
and then
way,
I
I used
have
to feel the same way about Howard Work being passed out. That's like it's so romantic. I want to be Howard
right.
Work. He's like
Right. I want to be passed
dies
out
at
on
his
a
desk
desk.
practically, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, oh, then I had kids. And then I realized, like, I don't spend any time with my husband. And that, you know, like more and more things, like even without the kids, honestly, it was starting to be like, wait, like, can I really do this? Because like life is long, you know, and I don't plan on retiring.
Right.
So I'm like, I've got like 40 more years of this. And I don't know if I can do it, but I'm looking around, and it's like, if I don't do it, someone else will. Like, they like, because they'll import someone who will do it, right? If
Sure.
not, you know, do it the merit. And that's where it kind of comes down to like, yeah, like I like meritocratic elements in the system, but at the same time, it's like, if you're if you're actually part of a community, then you have this perspective of like life is long, life has different phases. We don't want to execute people when they turn 30, right? Because
Right.
they're not productive enough anymore.
Well,
We
look at
don't want no one to have children or all the children to be autistic because we're not having them until we're 45. Like we are in this together. And that does mean, yeah, that like young people are going to work harder in crappier jobs. And, when you get older, things will be a little easier. And we're going to curtail the competition to enable people to actually have a full life that creates a healthy culture and a healthy environment for us, for children, for everything.
See, I still
And
think that's a meritocracy, though, Katrina. Um, because in a healthy environment, in a healthy free market, the people who've been doing something for years have an experience level that's can't be replaced by 10, 20-year-olds working overtime. And so it's just a different phase. It's like, okay, well, now this person, now that they're older, like I'm not going to expect them to work 80 hours a week. That's okay, but I need them around because there's a lot of wisdom and insight that's been gained through their decades of work here. And
so I
like they
see
still
that
provide a lot, and
though.
they move to more strategic level positions that but don't require as hard work.
But there's fewer and fewer of those strategic and supervisory positions. Like not
Sure,
everyone
but
can
not
take one of those
everyone. Sure,
positions.
sure, but not everyone wants Not everyone wants to stay working.
Sure, but then what do you like? So you don't have people like let's say this person is working like a typical desk job,
Yeah,
right? And they're putting in a good amount of work in their 20s, but not enough to rise up the ladder. And now they want
yeah.
to start a family and they're not going to move up the ladder. So what are they going to do? Like, what does that
What do you mean?
specific
What do you
person,
mean? What
what
are they
does
going to
that
do?
specific person do? Like, they can't keep
What they do
doing.
in the 1940s? They just kept working, and they had enough money because people's wages were high enough that they they had a house and two
Right.
cars or whatever.
But
Like,
okay, but we can't do that now, is my point. Right. Like
why not?
we literally, because that's a good question. Why
Is
not?
it because the
Because
government prints money? Is it because
yeah,
like
I'd say because the value
sure,
of their wages. Like, I mean, I wanted to say, I don't know. I'm not sure what my cost of living increase actually was when I was in San Francisco, but there was one year where my rent went up 25%,
right? Well, maybe
in
you
one
can't. Maybe
year,
there's
and
certain
your cost
pockets
of
where you
living
can't.
wage increase is 2.5% if
Sure,
you're
I get
lucky.
that. I get that. And you may have hot spots that light up with economic activity in a free market where like suddenly get priced out of the market and you got to move. Like, yeah, that can happen. You can also end up with spots where you're in East Palo Alto in 1970 and you paid 3 cents for your house and now you're a millionaire because
Yeah.
like that, yeah, that kind of random shit happens and that happens. But I think it's I don't fret about all these kind of weird situations that would happen in the free market because I don't know what would happen in the free market. Like, I don't know in a culture where we're all like, where free market was the emergent property of a good culture. I don't
Right.
know what would happen.
I
So,
don't know if
like,
I tie it. Yeah, I'm not necessarily tying it back to like the free market idea. I know that I can see that there's a significant problem with this very transient culture, which is what I see in the Bay Area, that like no one who's there intends to be there for a long time. So there's a
yeah.
lot of stuff that gets neglected because no one cares
And
about
eventually
it.
that will cave in on itself, right?
Yeah.
That will cave in on itself.
So
And
I'm
it's
not
only being
saying that the free
supported through
market.
taxes, right? It's like partly it's California. I mean, California is propping itself up with high taxes, but eventually that's going to fold. But if there wasn't all these taxes, California would have fallen apart. Like things would be much different. It would have fallen apart a long time ago. You would have seen the consequences, and there would have been forced change.
Yeah, it would
Right?
be interesting to see. Like, there's so many externalities
Yeah.
from different things that I don't know that anyone has enough information or enough mental bandwidth to piece it all together. So I'm still
But
down
I
to
don't think we
try
need to.
it. Try
I
freedom.
mean, but
But
yeah, no, the alternative is empowering a small group of people with force, and that we can see her head. It's okay. Just the
hmm?
top. You're looking down. We can see like just the top.
I
Go
know.
ahead. Okay.
I can see.
um, yeah, I don't know. It's it to me. It's kind of like it's similar to asking the question like, well, who will build the roads? It's like, who the hell cares? I don't know. Who cares? Should there be roads? I don't even know. How many roads should there be? I don't know. Neither does the government. Neither do you. Who the hell knows? Right? That's not relevant.
Maybe.
What's relevant is that like we're not initiating force against each other.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, again, I don't, like I said, I don't see it necessarily as a government thing. I'm talking more about like what values would I want to see in a culture, and I'm not sure that
oh
meritocracy is exactly the word that I would use because you may not be wrong about it, but it strikes me as a word similar to capitalism now that I think would be misapplied, or I don't know. I guess I just see risks associated with it
maybe. I
because
mean,
it's
it's
the
hard to
long
know.
term thing. Like that's really what's hard right now, right? Like just the time horizons on everything is so short, and I know that globalism and labor mobility is part of the reason for that.
Yeah,
And there are other reasons for it, but that's part of it.
that's
So
true.
I'm
No, you're
wary.
right. You're
Yeah,
right.
that's all.
And that's why you saw a lot more cohesion in communities. One of the reasons.
Yeah.
Um,
And here's the
and
other part of it, and you kind of touched on it earlier, but I like the lack of investment that people have even in the culture, right? Like I have been, so the way I see, I bring it back to objectivists, the way I see the objectivist community is there's kind of two factions of it. And at this point, I'd probably call one the hedonistic faction and the other one the, I don't know, boring faction. And I still think the boring faction is
wait, there's a
boring.
non-boring faction?
Yeah, I felt like our faction was like not boring. I don't know.
We're
Maybe
not
it's
really a
boring
faction
compared to
of
now.
objectivism.
It was a faction. Whatever.
Okay,
I'll
fair enough.
explain it to you later. I'll tell you names and it'll make sense to you
Fair
probably.
enough. Okay.
Basically, everyone we're friends with was like the cool objectivists, and everyone else sucked. But even looking at the side where I found people who were like enjoyable to be with and all of that, over time I ended up being very disturbed by some of what I heard from them, like literally explicitly stated, right? And their interpretation of, I guess, the idea of selfish. So the time horizon is, not short like welfare bomb short, but it is shorter than I think you can sustain a civilization on. Like things that I've heard include like, I literally don't care what the world is like after I die. Or like, I care a little bit after I die because I care about my children and I kind of care about my grandchildren, but after that, I don't care.
Well, that first one you heard directly from Rand. She was asked this question and she said, when
She
I
didn't have
die,
children though, at least.
I know,
But
but she said,
yes.
when I die, the world comes to an end.
Right,
So what
as
do
far
I
as she's
care?
concerned. Right. So what does she
Right.
care? Which is weird. Like
Which
I've
is
always
weird because she was also fighting for something that clearly was beyond her lifetime.
Right. I thought so. Maybe she didn't think so. Maybe that's, I don't know. And then the other things that I've heard are like, I remember confronting someone at a certain point because we were disagreeing on how you should behave in a certain situation, which is what objectivists talk about most of the time. And I ended up just kind of putting it as like, well, don't you think you should leave things better than you found them? Right. Like you enter a space and when you you eat at a table in a restaurant, and when you leave, like it should be a little bit cleaner than when you found it. Doesn't that seem like a good way to go about the world and existence? And this person said no. And that he also believed that the reason that I think things should be that way is just because I'm like wired such that I feel better if I do that. So I'm still doing it for like a hedonistic type of reason, right? Like it feels better to me to do this. Therefore I do it. It
This is
doesn't
the
feel
Mother Teresa
better.
was a hedonist argument. Is that what this is? Basically?
Yeah, something like that. It doesn't feel better to him, so he doesn't do it. And I'm just like, this is starting to look like the kind of like the same thing as like an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, right? It's like, but how are we going to have nice, like you like nice things. How are we going to have nice things in the future? And they're like, well, as long as they have it to the end of their lifetime, they literally don't care. And I don't know what to do with that, man. I mean, that's one of the things that makes me like, I don't know if that's like, an RK type of thing. Or if that's like we need religion back because like this seems very dangerous to me, at least
Well,
dangerous in the current structure. Like, I don't know, maybe this comes back to the noblesse oblige thing, which I'm also thinking a lot about, but it's like, for all that we Americans like to say, like, monarchy sucked, at least when you had a ruling class, right, you had like, you didn't have corruption like you have now, because there wasn't really a way to
there
enter
was no
it,
need.
right?
Yeah.
Well, there was no need, but it was also because people who are like, you, if you just have hereditary power, essentially, then you get what you get, but you don't really have access to it. Right. So you don't have this thing of like corrupt, evil people like seizing the levers of power as easily. I don't, obviously you can marry and do it. You can become an advisor. There's different things you can do. It's not impossible, but it's much less accessible than in a system like we have today. And if you do have, again, like the culture, and you do have the ruling class telling you like, hey, like, these are your people and you should like care about their best interests, and you love them, and like, it's your obligation to like nurture this like nation like a garden, right? Like, that is a lot easier to like, probably even to create and then to maintain, than it is in this kind of democratic situation that we have now, that just seems like it's a tragedy of the commons waiting to happen at every turn, right? Like, as soon as you have a generation like the boomers that are just like, oh, I don't care, I just want like to do drugs and have sex, it's like everything like falls apart like in a generation or two.
Yeah, I mean, I won't go so far as to say that monarchy is a better idea, of course.
Didn't technically say
But
that,
I know.
but I like where your head's at, Moltbug.
Well, but I will say this: democracy is stupid, right? Like, democracy is not the right. Like, there's no moral argument for why democracy is good, right?
Right.
That's not there, unless you believe in mob rule, which is not moral. Unless your morals are derived from mob rule, like,
There are
it's
people who
not.
believe that, but not a
Sure, I
lot.
get it.
Yeah.
They're wrong, but like, so democracy itself isn't good. I think the challenge was trying to come up with, like, well, what's the alternative, right? Well, I don't know, right? Because we've tried monarchy for quite a while and it didn't really go well. I guess in some
Seems okay.
senses you could argue it went well, but I don't think so. And so I think which is part of the reason why, when I look at this from like a philosophical perspective, this is part of the reason why I am an anarcho-capitalist, right? Which is like, okay, well, non-aggression is bad. Like, the non-aggression principle makes sense. Can I come up with a structure, a government structure that like implements that? No. Well, I guess we should leave it to, quote, the free market. The problem with that is, which I recognize is a problem, the problem is getting back to the culture, which is like, anarcho-capitalism wouldn't work at all right now. It would just be plain old anarchy and horrible. Like, it would be horrible. So I think a lot of the questions that you're asking are questions that really depend on culture. So to me, culture has like three components, right? There's morality, which is like, often it's based on a religion, but in our case, it wouldn't be, right? There's morality. There's aesthetic value, which is largely based on psychology, with some morality maybe thrown in there and some other components, but largely it's psychology. And then there's kind of this in between thing where it's like, we'll call it etiquette, right? There's this like, is it wrong to not hold the door open for a woman who's walking with you into a building? Not morally wrong. Is it considered polite? Yes, it's considered polite. And so I think you need the etiquette in a culture. The etiquette in the culture is not, you can't objectively prove it from the morals, but you do need etiquette that works. And if you're kind of engineering a culture, let's say you're God and you're engineering the culture that you want to survive, I think you do need to ask questions of like, well, do you leave the table better than you found it? Like, what's etiquette here? Because that's not a moral question, but it is an etiquette question, and it becomes a cultural question.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, because I that has eroded significantly. I think mostly because of multiculturalism, but it almost seems more deeply rooted than that from some conversations that I've had recently with people in the boomer and silent generation, that they really have this idea that I guess they feel like in the past we equated the etiquette and the morality, and that led to all kinds of bad things like dehumanization of people, like different peoples, right? Whether that's Jim Crow or that's something out, colonialism or something like that. But in the rush to separate those two things, it seems like they just went full moral relativism as well. And it also eroded like the understanding of the importance of the etiquette piece, right? So now it's like, oh, you're not moral. I can't actually morally condemn you for not like covering your mouth when you cough. That means that I should no longer expect people to cover their mouth when they cough.
And that's not true. You
and
can
that's
expect
not correct.
politeness. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, I can support your theory with a little bit of tiny little bit of fact. So because I'm working on this article at the same time, and it's kind of related to some of this. And I was looking up, I have an old dictionary from I think originally published in 1927, but I think it might be later. It might be 1956 is the final copyright. Doesn't matter. And I looked up the word culture in that dictionary, and I looked up in one in 1987, and then I looked up the current definition of culture. And the one from 1987 basically matches the current definition of culture, which is, I'm looking at it right now, the quality in a society that arises from a concern for what is regarded as excellent in arts, literature, manners, scholarly pursuits, etc. That's the dictionary definition, right? Regarded as excellent is interesting because it's not moral, although I think morality is actually part of culture as well. But the thing I want to bring up is the old definition was really weird. It did not say this at all. The old definition of culture basically said it viewed culture as, let's think of it as a timeline. And there was like more learning about the world and sophistication and less. And it viewed everyone was on this timeline. And we are at this point in culture. And if you look at another society, well, they're either ahead of us on the timeline or behind us on the timeline. It's not a plane of existence, it's a line. And so I think that was a very almost solipsist view of culture. This idea that like, well, they're different because they're behind us, right? That's how I viewed, probably the West was viewing it, right? Oh, those people over in, I don't know, pick a culture. Those people over in Ethiopia, they're different because they're behind us on the timeline. And then they'll catch up to us and we're going forward on the timeline. And at some point, and obviously that is a wrong view because there are there are multiple cultures, but we've switched to this view of culture, which is like, there's a lot of different cultures, but we don't seem to rate them anymore. Like we've kind of said like, well, they're all equal. In that culture, they stone gay people. Right. That's just their way. And like, we're reticent to say like, no. They're behind us on the timeline there. Like, that's not a sophisticated thing to do. That's wrong, right? They're less evolved culturally. But I think the truth is it's a mix, right? It's not just there's a bunch of different cultures. There's also, or there's one timeline. I think there's like, it's a multidimensional thing. And like, they are behind. I've talked about this before, but like, we have to be able to criticize cultures like Islam. Some of Islam is just, quote, different without any moral, evaluation. But a lot of it is less sophisticated, right? Yeah. And wrong, right? It's not as evolved culturally. Women should be able to drive, right? Yeah. That's a thing. Well,
assuming they can learn how.
You're a better driver than me, I think.
Probably. You're not a great driver.
No.
I do like the wipe your butt with your left hand thing in Islam. I think that's actually a really good idea. Also, I hate shaking hands. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a good idea. But I also
Excellent.
I don't like shaking hands.
Why is
I don't
why
like
is
bowing
that?
either.
You know?
The wiping your butt thing?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's like because you're supposed to do other things with your right hand. So like
Yeah.
you don't risk getting like your left hand dirty. I don't know. I think it's like seems like a good idea. It's also
Oh,
nice to have this.
you mean wipe your butt with your left hand and toilet paper or
Oh,
something?
oh yeah, no, I don't mean like the full. Yeah, don't use toilet paper. I mean like just use your left hand with the
Okay.
toilet paper. I see how that was confusing.
Yeah, I was pretty confused about that
No,
one. At
I
first, I
like
thought you
that
were
part.
making a joke about something, but yeah, okay,
No,
fair.
I'm just saying I really do like that part, but and then I hate shaking
Sure.
hands, so I think we should do something else than that. But
Sure. Yeah. Look, I mean, there's a lot of things
whatever.
that we can appreciate
I'll
about other
take
cultures. That's
yeah, I'll take shaking hands if we can keep, like guns,
right.
personal freedom. I'll deal with
Yeah.
getting a cold a
If
little
you
more
don't have
often
to
than
wear
I'd
a full
like.
head covering when you go outside, you'll deal with shaking
Yeah.
hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I kind of do that anyway because I'm so pale and there's so much sun up here.
Fair.
I would get less
Fair.
sunburn. I mean, hey, what did they know, huh? Those Muhammad was really he was looking out for us white women. He really was.
Yeah. Maybe this is a long term strategy.
If I got
Someday we're going to
kidnapped and
take over
taken to the
Europe, and we
Middle
need to
East,
make
I
sure.
would definitely wear a burqa.
Yeah. I don't know.
It all comes
All right.
together. See, there's wisdom. We can find nuggets of wisdom in even the most
Yeah.
barbaric of situations.
I bought a Quran recently so that I could read it.
Was it
'Cause
Tommy Robinson's Quran?
I never. No, does he have one?
Not anymore. Amazon banned it. It was
Oh,
called
really?
Muhammad's Quran. It's just I think it's as I understand it, it's just a straight translation of the Quran, but I don't know. I haven't read it. So if
Oh,
you can
but
find
they
it
banned it.
now, it would be yeah. Amazon delisted it.
Why?
They've been on a spree. Um, uh, uh, I mean, my private company, Carter. How can you dare
Well,
question
hey,
Jeff Bezos? He made a lot of money, so he must be a good person
therefore
who
he's
knows better
moral.
than you what books you should read.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, even objectivists, I don't think argue that you can't morally condemn censorship on the platforms. They just argue you shouldn't ask for government intervention.
But then they don't actually morally condemn it. That's the
No, they
thing,
don't. That's a
right?
good
This
point. They
is
don't.
what's
They
so
just shut
weird
up.
is it's like
Because they're mostly pussies.
this is bad, but they can do what they want. And
No.
I'm still gonna order my Twinkies and Ho-Hos on Prime with same day delivery.
Right.
I don't know if
Do
they
they
probably
do
don't eat
Twinkies and
Twinkies and
Ho-Hos
Ho-Hos.
on
I don't
sale?
know. I was just trying to say something derogatory, and that was what came to mind.
That's what came up. That's what came to mind.
I
Twinkies and
know that
Ho-Hos.
Leonard Peikoff's favorite foods are vodka and cake, but I don't think you can get vodka on Amazon. So
No, I don't think you can.
maybe you can get cake.
Wait. There's a what is it called? Prime Now or something?
Yeah,
I'll look and see if I can get Twinkies.
I'm sure you can get Twinkies. It's no
Really?
question. Yeah, there's no way you can get
Twinkies.
Twinkies. Are you kidding? With all the stuff
Nope,
that they
not Prime
ban.
Now. I can't
Oh,
get
not
Twinkies on Prime Now.
Oh well.
No, I have to wait for them to get delivered.
Okay, but they do have Twinkies. Because I was going to say, of all the
Yes, of
things
course
that
they have
Bezos
Twinkies.
could
Yeah.
ban, he could ban Twinkies, right?
Right.
Like I wouldn't be in favor of that personally. I don't want that to be like the business practice, but you could ban things that are really bad for people. Or you
Yeah.
could ban books that are critical of Islam. Of course, they also banned a bunch of books recently from, I think they banned 4 books from Black Nation of Islam writers.
Why?
So I believe as usual, they didn't give them an explanation, but it seems to be related to anti-Semitic content.
Ah. Is Salman Rushdie banned? No, he's there. Satanic Verses. Yeah.
Yeah, the bans are interesting. I mean, one thing that's really interesting that we could talk about another time because I'm going to run out of battery. But it is really interesting the extent to which these big tech companies simply don't have control over their employees and their infrastructure. Because I know what happened with certain bannings of books on Amazon, and a lot of them, they are like 100% like we know what happened, and it's a rogue employee with like a vendetta. But like
Right.
they've taken the book down like 8 times and have not been fired. right? And
Yeah.
it's like one part of the company has to fix the problem every time this guy takes the book down. And then the other part of the company that he works for, I guess, agrees with what he's doing or else just doesn't care enough to like deal with it. So
Right.
it's like, yeah, like it's just really interesting where it seems like we look at these tech companies and we're like, oh, they have an agenda, but it's like, yes, of course, like everyone has an agenda, like to some extent that's true, but they're not very well coordinated. Like they don't have control over what's happening in their companies to a shocking degree.
Well, I mean, look, it's not a military style dictatorship in terms of how companies were organized, right? We tend to think of it as very hierarchical, where there's like the CEO, and then it moves down in branches from there. And while that's still true, there's org charts. There's been a trend in the past, I don't know, 20 years to really flatten companies, especially recently, and empower people. And so you do actually have a lot of kind of semi-autonomous groups functioning and collaborating together within
But this is the
companies.
same thing as capitalism, which is like if you're going to do something like that, then you have a high level of individual moral responsibility.
Of course
And
you do.
everyone is failing
Yeah.
at that. And we're implementing that at the worst possible time in a place with absolutely no individual moral responsibility. So it's so ridiculous to me. I mean, when I first started working, I worked actually at a private company that sadly is no longer private. And, there was someone who did some rogue stuff and he was fired immediately. Like immediately. It was like there was never a time that I can think of. Like firing someone for underperformance was like maybe not super common, right? Like you had to underperform for a seriously long time and it was still a big process and, whatever, like that's fine. But if someone went outside of the bounds of like acceptable behavior, right? Like these employees at Amazon do, they were gone, like no question. It was
Right.
like they were escorted out of the building by security, right? And it's like, what
Well,
happens to
so
that?
you may not know this. Actually, people in California, not in California, might not know this. The California EDD, which is the labor division, the people that police uh, employee-employer relationships, they're pretty aggressively pro-employee, and so if you fire someone or you do anything that will cause the person you fired to uh, give them any reason for complaints against you, you're in a lot of trouble. So companies are pretty careful about firing when they shouldn't be, or justifying firing. So it might just be that like they're paranoid of firing people, because firing people in California is not the easiest thing to do if that person decides to make a stink about it. Katrina, I think you froze up. I don't know. Katrina's battery died, so I don't even know if the chat's still going. But if it is still going, we'll say goodbye now. This was Katrina's chat on her channel, so S Misanthrope. Follow her on YouTube. My name is Carter Laren. I'm from another channel, Unsafe Space, so you can find us there. But enjoyed the chat, and I guess I don't know if I need to close this or if it's already closed. But if it's not already closed, bye everyone.